esperanzador y qué retador lo que escuchamos, ¿verdad? Quiero agradecer a Deborah Edward, que va a platicar con nosotros sobre la importancia de la planeación estratégica. Deborah fue la fundadora del Museo de Niños en Austin y lo llevó de ser un concepto de museo sin muros a una institución floreciente en el que trabajó 16 años. Es la directora de Green Lights for Non-Profit Success, un centro de consultoría y capacitación para organizaciones sin fines de lucro radicada en Texas. Deborah tiene una amplia experiencia en trabajar con instituciones fuera de Estados Unidos, ha trabajado con instituciones en la República Checa y también en Rusia. En Rusia trabajó como parte del Fondo para la Cultura y las Artes. Su especialidad es los temas de gobernabilidad, de planeación estratégica y planes de acción cultural. Deborah, muchísimas gracias por estar aquí con nosotros.
Good afternoon. This is the hardest time to have a presentation after everyone's had some really good food. Our dancing was very limited. That wasn't quite enough exercise for real energy. And I think in about 20 minutes you'll all start falling asleep. So I may put some dancing in 20 minutes, but at least for a while, if you could just stay with me, that would be great. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm from the Pacific Northwest. I moved to Portland, Oregon in February of this year to help a small arts organization called Business for Culture and the Arts do new work to revive a 25-year-old organization that has been connecting corporate interests with arts for a long time. And when I got there, they said, we just want you to lead us in a new direction. We know that we want a new direction. We're a 30-member board, and we're really open to whatever you want to do. And I said, well, you know what? That's not quite the way that things happen in NGOs. You all need to be helping shape the strategic direction. So it's been a very enjoyable adventure for the last 6 or 7 months, talking out loud about where we're going and how we're doing it and what we need to do as a team to allow this organization to flourish and really add value to our community, which, if you haven't been to Portland, is a very arts-rich community with very little arts education. So kids are growing up without a whole lot of access to dance or music or film, theater or drawing or painting or any of the things that we as grown-ups have enjoyed in our past and enjoy in our present. So we're working on that in Portland. But what I'm excited about doing here with you is talking to a group of people that are all working on boards as volunteers, I assume, to help make your society better than it's been and to be leaders in making decisions that ensure that your organization can meet your mission and that you can do it in a way that's sustainable. So the story that we're going to be talking about this afternoon follows a little bit from this morning. How many of you were in my session this morning? Raise your hand if you were in my session this morning. Okay, we will touch for about 3 minutes on that mission money matrix, so just know that. But mostly what we'll be talking about is ways that boards think out loud, think together, have hard conversations, and move forward to make the mission that you are founded for come alive. So, let's get started. What are the challenges for boards these days? We have a lot of challenges. I think boards not only have to be the guardians of the mission for the organization, but they also have to be guardians for a lot of other things. We know what boards are supposed to do. Boards are supposed to carry the mission in their heart and take it out to every possible audience and community that you can. So as a board member, you're supposed to be out there at your church, in your neighborhood, at your business, saying, I work for this amazing organization, and why don't you get involved as well? So board members are ambassadors. Board members hire and fire the executive director. So you have to make sure that you've got the right talent in the room, that you're paying attention to the people that are working for you, and making sure that they do what you think is most important for your mission. Board members also have to make sure that the rest of the board is doing its work. So you guys are responsible for ensuring that the right people come on board, that people don't stay too long on the board and just start getting in the way of progress, that people that come to the board are prepared, that you've got the kind of representation that you want for your board so that your mission is really focused with a lot of people with diverse skills asking the right questions. You also have to pay attention to the finances. You have to make sure that your organization's got enough money to be able to keep going. Not only tomorrow and the next payday, but 2 years from now, 5 years from now. You've got to make sure that it's doing it in compliance with whatever laws are part of being a nonprofit in your community. And you need to be just making sure that you're really true to the mission. So the decisions that are being made by the board are the decisions that influence whether or not you really are making that difference. You need to be watching to see if you can measure making the difference. Being a board member is a lot of responsibility, and usually you only do it in your spare time. How many of you meet more than, how many of you have board meetings once a month? Okay. How many of you have board meetings once a year? Okay. 4 times a year is a little bit more common, but once a year is pretty unusual. And for a board to be able to meet once a year and be prepared to make decisions, it's pretty challenging. So you probably have a lot of communication you have to do during the year to keep them up and running so that they know when they're approving the budget or voting in new members or reviewing the contract of the executive director, they know what they're talking about. Because if you haven't paid attention all year, boy, having to get caught up in a hurry is a challenge. Anyway, being a board member is a responsibility.
A little bit slower. Slow.
Slow down. I'm talking too fast. I drank coffee at lunch to make sure that I refine. So this is what's happening when you see me on coffee. Don't tell my staff back in Oregon that I've been doing this. They know that I'm crazy on coffee. All right, so slowing down. Hopefully you got a little bit of that tirade about board responsibilities. Now let's talk about the details of what a board is talking about when they are focused and prepared. The challenges of a board are how do you determine the best mix of programs to meet your mission and financial goals? What are the right things that you should be doing? Are you doing the right things? Are you doing them in a way that maximizes your resources, that builds on your strengths, that makes you distinct? Are you doing what everybody else is doing, or do you have some special value, some special sauce, some way of really making a difference that's unique? And a board should be thinking about this all the time. What is it that you're doing? Why are you doing it? How are you doing it better than anyone else? How are you serving the kinds of people that you want to serve? What revenue models are available to fund you? Sometimes you start an organization because few people have the idea and have enough money behind it to get started, but you have to figure out how to continue. So the board should always be asking that strategic question about what do we have now to pay our bills? What kind of cash reserve do we have in case all of a sudden we don't have money? And how are we planning to be able to get money in the future? And that's a lot of thinking and a lot of planning and a lot of putting on your calendar visits and campaigns and calls and reports and evaluation. How can you position yourself to maximize your ability to secure funds? One of the big roles of a board member is to connect the organization to other organizations, other partners, other contributors, other potential contributors, government resources. And as a board member, you are opening the door for your staff to come in and say, hey, here's a great project. How do you want to work together so that we can get your financial support to be able to do the work that both of us need to see happen in our community? And then how does the awareness of what a board is doing and needs to do how does that shape your planning and your program? Sometimes what happens is the board says, well, we can't do all those things. We don't have enough staff. We don't have enough time. How do you as a board say, okay, we can't do it now, but perhaps we want to do it so much that we'll plan to get our resources ready 2, 3, 5, 10 years from now so that we can expand and we can grow. And then the big question, which is what we want to talk about today, is what is the board's role in the big strategic decisions? And I know for myself, I've had a number of situations where I was the executive director of the nonprofit. We had some big decisions to make, and some of those decisions required a leap of faith. So for example, I was running a children's museum in Austin, Texas. We were given an opportunity to get into a new building. The new building was in a part of town that was about to get developed but wasn't yet ready to be developed. The front of our building was fronting on where people that wanted a day labor construction job would stand in the morning to get picked up by whoever was needing construction workers at the time. That didn't really fit very well with parents with strollers, 2-year-olds walking around in the same place. And we were trying to decide, should we take advantage of this 10-year free lease in a part of town that in a couple of years was going to be the host site for one of the biggest hotels in the community and one of the newest city projects for City Hall. How could we pull this off? I'm sure as staff we could give a lot of information, but it was up to the board to say, we're going to do this. Here's how we're going to deal with the day labor challenge. Here's the amount of money that we're going to need to have before we pull the trigger and say we're going to start renovating this building. And here's how we're going to make sure that everybody sees this project as an opportunity that's exciting, and how we talk about it to all our friends and colleagues and people of influence. It was a leap of faith. The board voted 100% to say yes, but the discussion was very deep, very intense, and sometimes it was very divided. How does a board have that kind of conversation? It's a challenge, but it's really important. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about strategic thinking in general. We're going to talk a little bit about funding sources and what you need to do to think about being in the right place at the right time for a funder to say yes to your request. We're going to talk a little bit about your strengths and weaknesses and challenges in your own organizations, thinking about funding partnerships. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the role of the board in all the different aspects of mission fulfillment that we know. We're going to start by talking a little bit about how do boards make decisions. Before we jump into this, I know it's not 20 minutes in, but I want to keep your energy up. What I'd like you to do is turn to a neighbor and talk about a time on your board that you had a challenging decision to make. What kind of decision was it, and how did you discuss it, and how did that challenge work out? So let's take about 3 minutes to talk to a partner, ideally someone you don't know, but if it's someone that you do know, talk about 2 different situations. So take 2 or 3 minutes to just do that, and then we'll come back again and talk about decision making, okay? The question is to describe an experience of your board where there was a tough decision and there was contention. How did you make that decision? What was the disagreement, and how did you come up to an agreement? Okay? Let's talk to a partner for 2 or 3 minutes. Thank you. about 1 more minute, and then we'll close up this conversation, okay? Hopefully you've shared some interesting stories, and you've thought about some other ways of making decisions. I was told when I first started working in boards that if a board always has a unanimous vote for everything, there's something wrong with the board. The board is supposed to be a group that asks questions and makes decisions based not just on the fact that everybody wants to do the same thing, but because they've got some specific kinds of things that convince them that it's the right decision. So when you think about decisions, let's talk a little bit about how we make decisions. A lot of people make decisions based on information. What kind of information would help you make a decision? For example, about whether or not I should move into that new building, that old building with a little bit of challenge. Well, the information that we needed, the data that we needed, had to do with who was going to be moving in soon, what was the schedule of other things moving in. It was also about whether or not we could convince the voluntary hospitality group that was walking around downtown to police our part of the city so that everyone would feel very comfortable being there. We had to get some information about parking. How much parking could we make available for free? How much was going to have to be paid for? And so the board asked a whole series of questions, and they appointed what they called a tiger team, a team of 5 people that knew a lot about construction and downtown transportation patterns and parking and real estate. And that group was the group that got the information that we needed to be able to say in confidence, we think we know what we need to know to be able to make this decision. They were very data-driven. The other kind of decision that's often needing to be made is market-driven. You have a new program. You want to create an after-school program for young kids in low-income neighborhoods. You need to find out whether anybody's going to come to that program. So you have to get some market-driven information. How do you get that information? The board may commission an independent group from the university to go do some polling on the street to ask parents what it would take for them to send their child over to another program. I remember a friend that had a program like this, and when she found out that essentially parents would not let their kids take public transportation to an activity, she knew that her idea about bringing kids to a wonderful center about 10 blocks away from where school was not going to work. So what she had to do was convince the school to have an after-school program there, because she found out that the market of parents with young kids was not going to be willing to travel anywhere. They would feel safe at school, but not any further. So market-driven decision-making is also about information, but it's about information of the people that you're trying to serve. The third is mission-driven, and that's always important. Particularly when someone comes to you as an organization and says, you're really good at this, could you do more of that instead as well? And here you are, you're really good at giving food to the hungry, and they're asking you to also run a little drug abuse program on the side. So people that are hungry can come in and also get drug counseling. Well, is that really in your mission? If your mission was to feed the poor, does dealing with drug issues work with your mission? Probably not, but if your mission was to do whatever it takes to help our community be healthier and safer and stronger, then it does. So you have to think about which aspect of your mission is your focus. The next area is about sustainability driven. Can you try a project and know that you might not have the funding later? And that's where often a board is going to be split in terms of people wanting to take a risk, people saying, don't think we can do that because we don't know what it's going to look like down the road. And it's important to get both those voices. because then you can make a decision that's basically integrating the kinds of issues that are related to risk-averse planning and people who like to take risks. So we were doing, at the Children's Museum again, we were given a lot of money to create a camp for kids whose parents were working in the summer. And we said, we'll take that money, we'll create the camp. We want to get good at doing camps anyway. We don't know if the market 3 years from now is going to be able to sustain parents paying for the camp. So we'll try it, we'll see what happens. And if it turns out that the market won't help us later, and we won't be sustainable financially, we'll just call it a service for a couple of years and move on, which is what we did, because it turned out that parents didn't have the money to pay for that kind of camp later. So we ended up doing a great service for 3 years, and then we had to move on. The other is about relationships. Often, this is the most complicated kind of decision that a board makes. So you're on the board of a theater group, and another friend of yours is on the board of another theater group, and you've decided that the two of you want to do a co-production. Maybe not a good idea, but you two, board members from two different organizations, are strong and influential and persistent and just want to make it happen because you like working together and you think it's a really good idea. So wiser heads have to prevail sometimes and say, is there some other way that we can maintain this relationship? Is this going to be a really good thing for both of us or either one of us? How do we think about that? But frequently, relationship-driven decisions are important because board members know each other very well. Not only have they been working together for 6 or 7 years, but probably one board member recruited the other board member to come on board anyway. So that's an important thing to be considering. And the other is personality-driven. How many of you have a very strong executive director who says, I know we can do it, we need to take the lead, we need to make it happen. This is the most important thing that our community could get behind, and doesn't really listen to some of the ideas about, is this going to be financially stable? Is this really what people want? Are there any funders that want to be part of this? Is it really mission related? You have to think about that. How much does a personality get in the way or help make a good decision happen? And sometimes what you have to do with that is put some checkpoints in. So yes, we will do this, we will follow you, Executive Director, but we need a very detailed work plan, and we won't follow you unless you get 40% of the funding committed before we pull the trigger and say we can start hiring staff, or whatever it is that you need to do. And then the last is inertia. Often things happen on a board because you've been doing it that way for a long time, and you really don't want to think about it again. You revisited this decision 5 years ago. We've been having a gala every year for the past 5 years, and yeah, we're not getting as much money this year, but not as many people are coming this year, but it's the economy, it's not the event. Let's just give it another year. Let's just keep going. And sometimes you need someone in the room who doesn't have that long history to say, you know what, if we look around, we see other people are doing just fine with their galas, and lots of people are going to these other galas. Maybe there's something wrong with our gala. Maybe it's not just the times. Maybe it's really that we have to refresh our fundraising activities. And that's a challenge. Inertia is very powerful, as all of us know. So when you think about boards, when you think about decisions, you then need to start thinking about how decisions factor in.
Challenges, that's challenges. That's challenges.
Do you need help with the wording?
A piece of the work that we do is thinking about our programming. This is a quick refresher for the people that were here this morning. as board members, at least once a year, probably more often than that, you need to be thinking about what are you doing and what are your programs. And the challenge for making sure that your programs are fresh and are valuable is thinking about what's the mission money mix. So I'm going to talk really briefly about this and then move on to funding sources. But essentially, you have two axes that require you to be thinking strategically. The mission is what grounds you, and the money is what grows you. And you can look at if your money is high or low, and if your mission is high or low. And what you see when you start looking at the programs that you do is that the kinds of programs that are here, that are high money, but low mission, like your galas or your auctions or your raffles, they're important for money, but it's a little hard to justify them in terms of mission. If you look here, which is low money, but high mission, this is where often most of your programs are. They are kind of your heart programs. They're the ones that are really why you're doing things. The programs up here are your star programs. They're high money and high mission. And that's where you want as much as possible to see things happen. And this is where you want to not see much at all. These are the low money, low mission. So when we looked at the Children's Museum, we had a really great women's luncheon. It was right here. It made us $300,000 a year. It was great, really wonderful. We also had some incredible blockbuster exhibits. So we made money and we had mission-related work in our exhibits. We had a program that was called the International Children's Festival. We thought it was going to be a great idea for our community. It was getting lots of Girl Scout programs and cultural programs to come under one tent, one day of the year, and we'd have acrobats from China, and we'd have singers from the Balkans, and it turned out that we didn't make any money, and no one knew it was ours anyway. So it was right here, we had to stop it, because really, as much as we thought it was going to be fun, it didn't add to our bottom line, and it didn't add to our mission of giving kids hands-on experiences that were related to a museum. We had a lot of programs here. We had a free program for parents with young kids. We had a program for low-income parents who wanted to learn more about how to stimulate their kids' learning. And what we had here was a chance to move those up by looking for funders that really cared about those kinds of programs. We were very lucky that we got a lot of government support and foundation support to move the programs up. So that's what you'd be doing when you're thinking about your budget every year. How do you maximize the funding and the mission in a way that lets you be sustainable and lets you continue to grow and to be excellent and to stand out? And it's a board issue. It's a board issue when you think about budget. So as you think about those kinds of programs and changes, these are some ideas to make those work. The next area that I want to talk about goes beyond the budgeting, finding out where the money is coming from. Where are your funding sources? How many of you get most of your money from government sources? Raise your hand if you get most of your money from government sources. Just a few. Okay. How many of you get most of your money from foundation sources? About the same. How many of you get money from major individual donors? So this is pretty well distributed. Well, when you start thinking about money, you need to think about why someone is saying yes to you and what's going to make them say yes on a long-term basis. There have been a little bit of studies about the kinds of sources of money that are valuable to think about. And it's about how much autonomy do you have with the money and how reliable the money is? And this gentleman, John Pratt, is a very well-known writer and researcher in the United States looking at nonprofit funding issues. What he has said is that essentially, when you start looking at money, you have to make different decisions based on where your money's from. And he's talked about getting skills to be able to be attracting the kind of money that you need, that each kind of money requires different sets of skills. So he said that individual donations is a very important source for many people. And what do you need to do to attract individuals? What are people who are good at getting individual support? Tell me, what is it that you do? Raise your hand and I'll give you the mic. Back there, okay. That was not you. Raise your hand. Who's raising their hand about individuals? Over there. Okay, good. What are your tricks for getting individual support and keeping it?
Bueno, pues tal como lo decías en la mañana, conservamos la misión de la organización, hemos unido esfuerzos con otras organizaciones, hemos integrado una red. Nosotros estamos trabajando en la recuperación y apropiación de espacios públicos aquí en la ciudad de Chihuahua, en colonias de alta incidencia delictiva. Entonces, hemos unido esfuerzos con otras organizaciones, integramos una red de organizaciones. Y bueno, pues hemos ido adaptando la misión sin perder el rumbo de prevenir la violencia y de minimizar esa percepción de la inseguridad aquí en Chihuahua, de que la gente pierda el miedo, a las diferentes convocatorias que salen. Nuestros fondos provienen mayoritariamente del gobierno y también somos apoyados por la Fundación del Empresariado Chihuahuense. Pero sí, pues, por ejemplo, el año pasado participamos y traíamos un proyecto de 6.200.000, una cosa así, aquí en Chihuahua. Y este año, pues, aproximadamente va por 9 millones en fracción para la recuperación de 10 espacios públicos.
So what techniques did you use to get individuals to give you funding? You talked to individuals, families? What were the techniques that you used to ask them to give money over and above government money?
Nosotros no tenemos donantes de personas, nosotros participamos con el gobierno.
In the United States, 80% of the contributed income that comes to nonprofits comes from individuals. 80%. And that's a really interesting number, particularly since corporations keep thinking they give more than individuals, but actually corporations give less than 5%. Businesses give less than 5% of contributed income to the nonprofits in our community. So the challenge for getting individual gifts is figuring out why someone would say yes. Why would you give money to my children's museum? What would make you say yes?
Probablemente porque quisiera ser parte de la organización, parte del proyecto.
Okay. So you want to be part of a project. So you might say yes because of the social relationships or because of the value of the project. Who else would say yes to me if I asked you for some money for the Children's Museum? What would make you say yes? What would make you say yes?
Pues quizás sí reconozco en ese proyecto la posibilidad de intervenir en la sociedad, ¿no? Seguramente sería así, situaciones tanto monetarias como de trabajo, voluntarias.
So you actually might say yes if you were volunteering. If you were part of the organization and you saw the value firsthand, you might then say yes to give money. And actually, in the United States, the research says that people who volunteer give more money than people who don't volunteer. So in all, animal rights, environment, arts, education. So you might say yes because you know about us. You might say yes because you care about us. You might say yes because someone that you know asked. You might say yes because a famous person that you respect is part of the organization. But individual giving and individual gifts, if you're going after that kind of money, takes a lot of care and maintenance. It's important to talk to your individual donor 5, 6, 7 times a year. Might be a newsletter. It might be congratulating them when you see them in the newspaper, having done something special. It might be a birthday card. It might be an annual report. But individuals take a little bit more work. And yet, as you build a culture of philanthropy, which I think many people are trying to see happen in Mexico, what you want to do is you want to help individuals feel like it's fun to give and it feels good to give. And that means catching them maybe in high school, maybe them in college, and helping them build up from giving a small amount to giving more. So being able to build into your plans individual giving is an interesting option for boards to talk about. Someone just have a question? So the next group is what you're talking about is quotas. Hold on. It's pooled funds. So these are funds where groups of people come together and give money. It's a little bit like Paycheck, in that Paycheck's got a large amount of money that's been collected from many people. And the decision making is not about the people that have given the money, even though they've given it slightly voluntarily. It's more about the people that are collecting the money having a relationship with your organization. And so the work there really has to do with giving a lot of information when they ask for it. So when Paycheck says, we need to know how many people you served yesterday, you need to be able to answer. And being good stewards of that money, knowing where it's going, where it's coming from, and keeping track of reports. The third, which is about third-party payers. Let's see where we put this. Third-party payers are when you're asking one funder to pay for the services for somebody else. So you may be giving education to poor children, but a third party, maybe the school district, is paying for that extra education. And those relationships are complicated and require a lot of information and a lot of good record keeping. The other one is dues, member dues. You get a lot of people that all care about the same thing. They all are supportive of environmental activities, and they want to be part of the organization, like the Children's Museum people have said they want to be part. You need to give them ways to get involved. You need to give them volunteer cleanup days. You need to give them the backpack that shows that they're part of the team. And you need to make sure that as an association that they're proud of the work that they're doing with you. Earned income is a very big deal right now. And I think for the last 5 or 10 years, people have been looking more and more at how to earn income. Either through fees, or sales, or royalties. The trick for earned income is it can be very unrestricted, but you've got to make sure you've got the market and the product. And foundations is one that's really an important growing thing here in Mexico. How many of you are getting foundation funds right now? Foundations, yeah. Foundation funding? How many are you getting foundation funding? Okay. Tell me why a foundation says that they want to give money to you.
because of the tax.
Otra porque la fundación se creó para ayudar a los demás.
No,
Fundaciones altruistas.
no, philanthropic. I can't think of it.
So the reason that your foundation gives money to you is partly because they need to give the money away. So they can give it to anybody, but they like you. But also because you're consistent with some of their values. So making yourself visible to foundations, being consistent with their values is a real key piece of the work that needs to be done for fundraising. So these are all these different ways of getting money. How do you as an organization position yourself to be the recipients of this funding, and how do you as an organization steward that money so that you'll get it again? I want you to talk again in a small pair about what you think your organization's strengths and weaknesses are in fundraising. What are your organization's strengths and challenges or weaknesses in terms of fundraising? Let's take about 5 minutes for each of you to talk about what you think is working and not working in terms of getting funding. Okay? Great. Take about 1 more minute, share all your good ideas and your challenges. Okay, so hopefully you identified some strengths. Perhaps your strengths had to do with your board members who were very good at asking people for money, or board members that were very willing to have a party at their home and invite their friends to learn more about your organization. Or board members that were willing to give you a raffle item so that you could sell things and make that money possibly valuable for your programs. Perhaps your strengths were that you had good management, that you were really good at keeping to a budget and to a timeline, and you sent out letters or grant proposals on a regular basis and got good response. Perhaps your strength was that you're really good at social media, that you found a way to capture the imagination of the community because your board members use Twitter or Facebook and talk about what you're doing. Perhaps you talked about your strengths as having very strong relationships with your government, or with a major donor or a major business. Perhaps you talked about your strengths as being a very, very good project for marketing opportunities for businesses, that people want to be part of whatever it is that you're doing, so they can be visibly attached to your name as a brand for them. The other thing is that perhaps you had some challenges. What kind of challenges did you all come up with? Anybody want to share any challenges? Well, typical challenges are people say they'll do it, they won't. They don't show up. When board members say, oh yeah, I'll call, and then they're gone for 2 months and they never quite remember that they had promised to do something for you. Another challenge is when you think you have a really good deal with some organization or some funder and they say, oh, we've changed our minds, and you don't have any leftover contingency funds from somewhere else to use to get through the time? What other challenges have people had? Maybe your challenge is that you just can't figure out how to write the letter that invites people to say yes. Give them too much information or not enough information, or you send it at the wrong time. None of those are really challenges. They're just kind of explanations for maybe why you didn't get money. But the important thing is that as a board, you think about what you need to do to position yourself for success, for the different kinds of funding options that are there. So I want to go through this chart just briefly. And I think I've got it back in order now, so thanks for your patience before. Let's talk about what you need to do to be effective in this kind of funding for different revenue sources. For government, you need to know the rules. You need to know the deadlines that you have to give reports, the deadlines that you have to give proposals. You need to fill in every single form and every single box. You need to be able to negotiate favorable contract terms. And that's really important. It's, I think, the case in Mexico as it is in the United States, that some things are negotiable. So when a funder says, you have to do this by a certain date, and you can't, call them up and say, hey, this is a different date. Is there some way we can think about this? And find out how negotiable the terms are. If a funder says, we'll pay you 90 days after you spent your money, and you don't have a cash reserve to cover that 90 days, call them up. See if there's a way that you can get early money or a cash advance. One of the things about government money is you do need a cash reserve because often government pays late, at least in the United States. So hopefully you don't have that problem, but if you do, make sure that you've got enough cash to cover when the government shuts down for 6 weeks and will not be writing checks for whatever reason. So under individual, we already talked a little bit about individuals. You need to know your donors. You need to communicate frequently. You need to be able to tell good stories and tell them in a playful, inspiring way. You need to give good numbers if you have numbers. You need to use your volunteers to continue to reach more individuals. And you need to always be looking for new donors. When I teach fundraising, I often talk about fundraising being a lot like dating in high school. Before you start to date somebody in high school, you have to get their attention. So you may do that by dressing the way they dress, or hanging out in the same places that they hang out, or having a friend tell them that you like them. Do you remember any of this from high school? So eventually they notice you and you're ready to ask them out. You have to pick the right time to ask them. You have to figure out where you're going to ask them. Are you going to ask them in the hall by the locker or in the lunchroom? Or maybe at the ball game? Or maybe with their brother present? You know, where is it that they're going to say yes? And once they say yes and you start dating, you need to continue to be nice to them. You can't just take them for granted. You've got to say, I like how you're looking today, and congratulations on this great award that you got. It's so nice to be with you. Those three things in fundraising are called cultivation. That's the first one. Cultivate your donor. Solicitation. That's asking them out. And frequently, individuals say that the reason that they don't get to give money is that no one asked them for money. You've got to remember that solicitation part. And the third part is what we call stewardship. It's continuing the relationship. And a lot of people say, you know, they took my check or they didn't write to me again until they asked me for my check again a year later. They never thanked me.
Nunca me agradecieron.
They just took it.
No me hablaron, tomó el
That's not what you want to be known for. You want to be known for good stewardship.
Hay que ser conocido.
So having a good system for individuals means thinking about those three aspects.
Tres aspectos son los dominadores y
So it's United Way, this pooled funds. More like the group funds, the community foundation funds. United Way, by the way, is a workplace giving program where if you're an employee, you can elect to give a payroll deduction once a month to someplace that you want to give money to. And there's a group like United Way or United Arts Fund that brings that money together and gives it out in a special way. They tend to have rules when they give that money out. Either you can say, I'm going to give all my money to the art museum,
voy a dar todo el dinero al Museo de Arte,
or you say, I'm going to give the money to your United Fund pool, and you decide where to put it, where to give it.
al fondo grupal de United.
So if you're getting money from the United Way,
Da dinero del fondo múltiple,
you need to think about how they change their rules, how they change their priorities.
cuando cambian sus prioridades.
You need to be prepared to go to a workplace and tell your story, because that helps the United Way get money.
La historia de las empresas empiezan a
And they always ask for information at odd times. You have to be able to give that information. So good information systems are really valuable.
sistemas de información es muy valioso.
So member dues. How many of you are membership organizations again?
¿Cuántos tienen la membresía en sus organizaciones?
Okay.
Así por
So you know the challenge of member dues.
¿Saben ustedes el reto que significa?
Frequently the board is huge. I think I have, right now, up to 50 people can be on my board. I'm a member organization right now. So you have to slow down and do things in a little bit of a slower way. You need to track their interests. You need to ask them once a year what they want to hear from you about. You need to think about pricing. Is the member dues the right amount right now? Are you getting enough money, or are you losing members because the costs are too high? And you need to really be able to provide valued member benefits. How do you decide what people need, what people want? What's their value proposition? Membership is a kind of expensive, it's more expensive in some ways, time-wise, than individual giving. But they stick with you for a long time, so it's a good thing. So third-party payers.
Los terceros que pagan
What you need for that is good systems, good financial systems.
sistemas financieros.
You have to be able to say, I want reimbursement for this service that costs this much on this date for this client.
En tal fecha, con tal.
So investing in good information technology will help you be ready if that's where you want to go. And for earned
Y
income,
para ingreso
you
pagado,
need to be known for excellence.
tienen que conocer todos ustedes.
You want people to say, we want to buy from this group.
Quiero comprar,
We want to go to this
quiero ir
museum.
a este museo.
You need to be innovative in your projects and your products and your services.
Y en sus servicios.
You need to market relentlessly.
Tienen que
Earned income means that you need to be visible, for people to want to buy you.
decirles para que la gente quiera comprarles a ustedes.
And that also means you need to know a lot about your customers. Ongoing customer research. Asking them, doing polls, getting an expert from outside to do those polls. You need to know who your competitors are.
¿Quiénes son su competencia?
Frequently, a nonprofit will start doing something, get some money, and a for-profit will come in and do the same thing cheaper
Lo mismo más barato,
with more marketing dollars.
más.
Does that happen to any of you guys? Not yet? Well, if you're creating nonprofit films or exhibits, yeah, I mean, just, it's an opportunity for a competitor, so you have to be able to be ahead of the competition and to know that competition will happen.
La competencia va a presentarse.
And then the other thing that's important
Otra cosa que es importante
is to continue to find some,
seguir encontrando
we call it seed money if you want a new product.
fondos semillas.
So see if you can get some seed money, and before you go out and do a new product, you've got either a market or a product that's going to be sellable. So these are all different ways that you have to think about getting money, And each of you probably is getting exhausted thinking about all these things. Hopefully, you don't have to do all of them. The other one about foundations, many of you do have foundation money. You've got to show that you're good at what you do. You have to stay new and different and fresh. And you need to be staying connected to the foundations. Call the foundation officer, give them a report, invite them to your events. And then a lot of people talk about diversifying, a blended amount of money from a lot of different sources. And that means the board's got to be really attentive. Are we continuing each month to get what we expect to get from these different sources? Is our cash flow looking like it's going to be losing money because we don't have enough people coming to our special event? Or because our foundation said no? This is where you need a lot of really strong strategic planning and a lot of good financial expertise. So, does that give you a good overview of different ways of getting money? Many of my friends say it's just really earned income versus contributed income. And those are the two big differences. But I think when you're in a nonprofit that's at an early stage, you have to look at all these different kinds of funds to see where you can get started, and then see where it's really going to work. So I talked about strategic thinking, not only about money, but about other decisions. And I want to go into one more way of thinking. That relates to strategic planning. And it's about a model called governance as leadership. This is a book that came out of Harvard about 3 or 4 years ago. And these three writers talk a lot about how exemplary boards function. And what they basically found is that a board has to function on 3 levels. And they've named the levels: the fiduciary level, the strategic level, and the generative level. And I want to describe what each of those is, and invite you to be thinking at any board meeting on all 3 levels. So the first level is kind of the fiduciary tactical level. What happens there is that's where, as a board member, you're looking at the financial statements when you're at a board meeting. You're making sure that the tactics that are being used are good, that you're in compliance with any laws. You're approving and monitoring policies. You're thinking about what's getting done, and you're kind of checking things off. This is very much the kind of on-the-ground fiduciary tactical focus. And usually, when you're looking at a board agenda, you can see that there's a lot of tactical focus when you see that the first agenda is the minutes of the meeting from last month being approved. Then the next agenda is the Finance Committee report. And then the next agenda item is evaluation data report. You're focusing on tactics. Really important, because as the board, you are the people that are the fiduciary responsibility container. It might not be the most fun, but it's the most common. To me, this is a little bit more fun, the strategic part. So strategic people are talking about thinking together to discover what needs to be done, how we should do it differently. There's a lot more focus on flexibility, on asking the question why more than the question how. The conversations at a board meeting are a lot more content-driven. You may be talking about a really interesting issue about how you position your organization to be responsive to a community issue that's just come up. The protocol varies. It's not the same kind of report month after month, meeting after meeting. And you're bringing in data from many sources. So a good strategic question at a board meeting might be, we have the right partners to fulfill our mission? And the board members may say, hey, you know, we could be working more with the Chamber of Commerce, or we could be working more with the school district, or we could be working more with this really cool nonprofit that's just getting started, that's doing something like us, but in a different community. That's the kind of strategic question. It's about the organization growing, moving, changing, responding, and putting time into your board meeting for that kind of conversation is a little bit of a challenge. Mostly what you've been doing is committee reports. However, you can always get a committee that's the planning committee, or the innovation committee, or the ad hoc committee on partnerships, or the collaboration committee. And they can report in a way that allows all of you to talk. And this is the third level. It's called generative. And what it really means is that you're thinking about the big picture. So if you're an environmental group, you're not just talking about the programs that you do and how you're sustainable and how many people are part of your conversations, but you're also talking about global warming and policy issues and how you as a small local group might get more people to become advocates of some of the national or international issues. You may be talking about research that's come out that changes the way people are thinking about certain kinds of habits. What you do when you start thinking on the generative level is you look at the underlying cause. And the board's not just asking the strategic questions of how will we be better. They're also asking, how will the world be better? What can we do in the big picture scheme? The way these guys talk about it, they say it's non-linear and non-logical. And usually those are the kinds of conversations you have at a dinner party or a cocktail party or a strategic planning retreat where you brought in some national experts to help you frame the problem in that bigger macro way. How many of you feel pretty comfortable in the tactical work of your board? Raise your hand. How many of you feel pretty comfortable about the tactical work? For those of you who don't feel like you've covered the tactical work, what are the missing pieces on your board about tactical fiduciary level 1 work? Anybody got an idea about what's missing? What kinds of things might be missing, what you could do to get more of the tactical work done? You guys are very quiet. I need someone to raise their hand. What's an example of a tactical, what's missing in the tactical fiduciary part? Is there a hand up anywhere? Otherwise I'm going to start calling you. Yay! Thank you, thank you. A hero.
Están muy calladitos, ¿eh?
Nos falta planeación y lo que tenemos planeado aterrizarlo. No lo tenemos ni estructurado administrativamente ni en un proyecto a plazos. Entonces batallamos para eso porque no saben exactamente lo que quieren ni cuándo a veces.
So one of the fiduciary tactical things to do is to schedule your planning cycle. And for those of you that already do this, you can ignore this part. For those of you that don't, a good planning cycle is probably a 3-year cycle. So you put it to your calendar at the beginning of your year, getting your board together to talk about what are your strengths and weaknesses right now in all the areas of functioning that your organization has. How are you doing in terms of mission and money and marketing and governance and management? And you do that analysis. You bring someone in to talk about the environmental forces that you need to be paying attention to in your field. You get your team to start talking about where they want to be in 2 or 3 years. And you start a process that allows you to bring good strategies together, and then you bring your staff together to look at all those good ideas and come up with a 3-year plan. And frequently what you do in that planning cycle, you have about 4 months of learning and dreaming, and about 3 months of writing and budgeting, and about 1 month of review and approval. But then you're set for 3 years. And during that 3 years, you build in every year an evaluation of how well you're doing compared to your goals and your timeline, and what you need to tweak to change for year 2 and 3. Then you start again, year 3. How many of you already do that? If you don't, I think probably there are resources that could be found to help you make that happen. There usually are a lot of people that like to be consultants to facilitate that process. But there's some very good books. I'm going to put the name of one gentleman named Peter LaPiana, who's got a great book on how to do it yourself. He's a San Francisco-based person who's done a lot of strategic planning. So that's a strategic issue, but it's also a tactical issue. Any other tactical issues that have come up that people think about as we talked about the tactical fiduciary review? For a lot of organizations, reviewing the financial plan is really hard. People on the board, they just can't read the stuff. They don't want to read the stuff. The treasurer says we're in good shape. That's all that they do. And every once in a while, what you find out is that somebody in your staff has embezzled a lot of money, or that what you thought was a cash reserve is actually a deficit. And you don't want to be caught like that. So an important thing to do is make sure that your treasurer reports details. Get a finance committee that has more than one person on it. And pay attention to when you hear stories about misactivities, misbehavior in the nonprofit world, to make sure that your system won't allow for that kind of thing to happen. There are too many stories by people that I know who were very good board members who were on a board and didn't really pay attention and found out way too late about some financial misbehaviors. So tactical, got it covered. You're now all kind of like, oh, I'm really nervous. It's going to be fine. Just keep talking to one another. Strategic. How many of you feel good about your strategic work in your board? Okay. What makes your board good at strategic thinking?
Creo que el contacto con las necesidades de las organizaciones, el conocer el mercado y el poder acercarnos herramientas innovadoras para resolver ese mercado. Y el hacer una planeación participativa, incluyendo a los beneficiarios, a parte del operativo, y ahora estamos pensando que tenemos que incluir a todos nuestros socios estratégicos.
So that's actually, when you have more strategic partners, you have more reason to be talking about strategic issues. So if some of you are pretty much working on your own, consider at least a loose partnership with a group that's like you as a way of having a reason to have this kind of discussion. You were also going to talk about the strategic work that you do. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yo creo que en nuestro caso estamos en una etapa, estamos dando un brinco, porque mucho tiempo las estrategias descansaron en una sola persona. Los socios son consejeros y la posición de ellos era decir, no, aprobamos toda cuanta iniciativa haya, la aprobamos, nosotros te apoyamos. Ahorita estamos ya en un cambio, tenemos ya 4 consejeros nuevos, diversos, y tenemos toda la intención de crecer. Estamos construyendo instalaciones propias, puede ser nuevo todo, más ideas, más refrescante.
More fresh ideas is the big term here. I think that's one of the values of having regular changes at the board, and it's one of the really special opportunities when an executive director steps down and you're bringing a new person on. That's when a lot of strategic thinking happens, and that's a really important way of keeping your organization, your mission fresh. So what about generative? That's usually the hardest one. How many of you have had recent generative conversations on your board? It doesn't happen as often unless you're in an advocacy organization. So my challenge to you is to come up with 1 or 2 questions a year that you can ask your board, even on a survey rather than in a conversation, that connect your board back to the generative issues. One way to do that is to find a good article in the newspaper or in a magazine that's part of your kind of circle of work. Send it out and say we're going to have kind of like a book club conversation, 10 minutes at the board meeting. There's a lot of different ways to do that, but the challenge is to think about at least once a year putting something in that brings people back to the reason that your organization exists, over and above your local issues, your larger issues. Okay? So the book that was written by Brian Chait and White is easy to find. The challenge is getting the board involved after you've read it. So I encourage you to do that. I'd like to put some time right now into having you group one more time as a small group and talking about one idea that came out of this session this afternoon that you want to play out, that you want to work on when you go back to your board. So think about one idea that's come out. It perhaps might be about funding, or about fundraising, or about mission and money mix, or about board meetings, or about something totally unrelated that just came up because you were sitting here and you just wrote it down. But spend about 5 minutes talking to a partner about what you want to do when you get back to your organization. That'll be a little different because of what we've done this afternoon, okay? Clear? let's see about 1 more minute. See what you can do. Ideas of new ways to do business back at the board. I've given up on volunteers. I'm going to call on people. Can the two of you tell us one thing that you're going to do different? Yeah, can you tell us one thing that you're going to do different in your board?
Ok, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Humberto Contreras. Yo no dependo de ninguna fundación. Trabajo en una empresa del corporativo Conferencia. Lo que estoy viendo que aquí se manejan varias causas, asociaciones, pero entre ellos, no sé, a lo mejor sí, a lo mejor no se maneja, que haya comunicación, alimentación entre ellos mismos, de que se junta una vez al año, se coordina una vez al año, de plantearse objetivos a corto, largo plazo, un año, medio año, otra vez de apuntar y entre ellos expresar las problemáticas que se han presentado, los logros y probablemente entre ellos mismos busquen mejores resultados a los procesos que tengan, no se maneje algo así entre ellos.
So more market research, more feedback. Those are things that are really valuable if you're running an NGO of any kind. Any other stories that anybody wants to share? I may have to call in one more group. Nobody wants to share, huh? All right, I'm going to call in another group then. You guys are smiling over here. What's one thing that you will do different on your board because of our conversation today?
We were talking the previous chat that you had, that we had. We were talking about that we need to inform every single one of the meetings about the mission because we need to walk to the same line. And I guess every meeting we are going to try to do that with the board.
That's a really good idea. I remember at the Children's Museum, we gave everybody on the board a little card at the end of our strategic plan. And on one side of this yellow card that was laminated, that would go in your wallet, was the strategic vision and our mission. And on the other side were our 4 major goals that we're going to be driving our work for the next year. And we'd asked everybody to pull it out at the beginning of a board meeting. And hopefully they read it every once in a while, but they always had it with them. It was a good idea because really, if you don't know how to say your mission, you're having a hard time explaining what you're doing to anybody else. It's great. Yeah.
Yo también estoy en una empresa y una de las partes más complicadas es la procuración de fondos en parte de los empleados, de participación de ellos de manera activa y que se comprometan o que se identifiquen con las causas que apoyamos. Se apoyan varias asociaciones, pero es difícil comunicarles tantas misiones o tantas causas de manera específica. Platicábamos ahorita Humberto y yo de que a lo mejor si empezamos a comunicar un poco más, de hacernos el propósito, que es una tarea que nos llevamos, de mensualmente estar invitando a la gente a que conozca las fundaciones. Lo hemos hecho, pero de manera un poquito más aislada. Incluso tenemos un programa que se llama Apoyo a una Causa, en donde eso es lo que estamos haciendo, invitando a que ellos digan, doy un donativo por nómina, de tal cantidad la que ellos decidan y que mensualmente se esté entregando a la causa que ellos decidan. pero realmente a lo mejor si nos ponemos un poquito más a trabajar en mes con mes, darles información de una asociación en particular, pues iremos enganchando poco a poco a la gente que quiere ayudar a niños, a la gente que quiere ayudar a personas de la tercera edad o a algunos grupos vulnerables, y eso es algo que nos vamos a llevar para hacerlo de manera diaria.
Sounds good. Communication will help a lot, frequently. There are three things, I told you about the dating issue for funding. Three other funding tips before we kind of end with some questions. There are three things to remember about funding. People give to people. People give to people. It doesn't matter if it's a government, a company, a individual, a party, whatever. People give to people. People give because they're asked. If you don't ask, you don't get. And people give for their own reasons. So you have to appreciate that what you think is the right reason may not be the reason that they give their money to you. I remember once spending 2 or 3 years trying to get in a position to ask a very wealthy mother of 3 kids for $1 million gift for a building. And at first she didn't say yes, but then she did say yes. And I found out later that she didn't say yes because she thought it was a great thing and because she really cared about a children's museum. She said yes because we gave her a chance to put her name on the building. And she said, I was having a hard time with one of my daughters, and I wanted to make sure that when she was a teenager, and she was really mad at me, she walked by this building, she could say, at least my mother did something right. I never would have guessed that was going to be the reason that she said yes for $1 million gift. But that was a very interesting way of thinking about how you make a decision. So we've talked a lot about strategic planning, about funding, about fundraising, about boards. Are there any questions that you have that we could talk a little bit more about? We have a few more minutes.
Gustaría que nos dieras algunas otras ideas de cómo hacer un consejo que trabaje en la parte generativa. Aunque a lo mejor no lo hacemos todos en nuestros consejos, digamos que la parte fiduciaria y estratégica tenemos más herramientas. Pero a la hora que quieres entrar a lo generativo, parece como que las personas del consejo podrían sentir que están como fuera de lo que nos toca, ¿sí? O sea, como que en el generativo es ir como un poco más allá de tu propia causa, pensando más en el bien común, y pareciera que eso no es estratégico, ¿verdad? Pero yo creo que es muy importante porque en el sector social tenemos la posibilidad de pensar en el bien común. Cuando piensas en el bien común, entonces hay muchas cosas de las que tendríamos que estar pensando que se pueden volver una manera de hacer las cosas, una manera de apropiarse de algunas situaciones que pueden cambiar la manera en como desde cada organización lo hacemos. Pero es bien difícil, o sea, no encuentro cómo debe de ser esa mecánica, cuáles son ¿Cuáles pueden ser los inputs que podamos poner allí para poder empezar a creer que tenemos necesidad de eso para nuestra vida?
So let me give you an example of something that we're doing right now at the Business for Culture and the Arts. Our vision is to engage every business in the arts. Big vision, we think it's mostly about Portland and about Oregon, but it's still a big vision. So recently, the city has come out saying that there's a real problem with ethnic diversity in our community. People from minority cultures don't have as much access to the arts, to jobs, to education, to opportunities for lending, and that there's been a systematic way of keeping people who are not white out of the basic mainstream of Portland. So we took that as a key challenge for us. So we want to make sure that every business is engaged in the arts, but especially every minority business, and every minority member who's an employee of the business. And so when we started doing our strategic planning, we got a lot of information from a coalition of communities of color, a group that has been doing research in the Portland area about what are the systematic barriers to access in the arts and in jobs and in education. We brought them in to be part of a committee of a working group of members of our board and other members to talk about how we can put diversity into every aspect of our strategic plan. And we are systematically now looking at how to change our membership, how to change our board, how to change our marketing, how to partner with the communities of color, chambers of commerce, and how to think about being positioned as a training vehicle for other groups that want to think about access to the arts for minorities. But what we had to do was bring in experts. And we had to capture that question and make it our own. That may be an example. Okay. Any other questions? There's one back here somewhere. Yeah. Bring the mic back there. I can do a lot more walking. No dancing, but walking.
No sé si sea igual en Estados Unidos, pero aquí en México, las personas que participamos en esto, pues nos vamos topando en todos lados los mismos. Y entonces acabamos participando en 2, 3, 4 consejos. Creo yo que tenemos un gran reto que es involucrar a más gente. Hay gente que se va a enamorar también, igual que nosotros nos hemos enamorado de nuestras causas. ¿Cuál sería o cómo fue la evolución de cómo estamos aquí en México, cómo estamos en Estados Unidos?
This issue of getting new leadership, new blood, is as vivid in the United States as it is here. What we have in the United States is a whole lot of board members who are near retirement or already retired, who can remember how good they were when they were in their 20s, but aren't quite willing for the kids in their 20s to take on the leadership roles that were easy to do when the older people were in their 20s. So there's this whole conversation about generational change in leadership. And 3 things are happening. One is that there's a lot more conversation about getting small emerging leader groups to be connected to boards, but not be on boards. So you get an emerging leader group that's working with an art museum. They put on an event every year. But they also start grooming people to become board members. Another is that there's a lot more board training for young people to get them to be aware of the skills and also to give them internships on boards so that the boards who are not yet really welcoming of young people at least see them on a regular basis on the boards and begin to appreciate them and respect them and value them. And then what's also going to happen that all of us know, young people are going to create their own new nonprofits to address issues that we haven't even thought of. So I think the important thing is to appreciate that this change is about to happen and to be able to be a guide on the side, not an expert getting in the way of new leaders emerging. And that takes some trust, and that's a hard thing for us. We think we know what we're doing. It's a small group of people that are the change makers in any community, but there's a lot of people that are ready to help us. And we just need to find a way to work with them, to respect them, to give them a chance to shine, and to give them some guidance on the side too. One more question and then we'll let you guys go back to the next event.
¿Cómo se llama el museo de arte que estás al frente, en el que estás al frente en Portland?
The Museum of Art in Portland is the Portland Museum of Art. And if you've ever heard of the artist Mark Rothko, who does these beautiful paintings of colors, he's from Portland. And it's a small museum, but it's a lovely museum with a lot of glass art and a lot of kind of traditional arts. And it's not the only group that's having a young professionals group. The opera's got it, the ballet has it. The Philharmonic has it. All the big arts groups in town are aware that most of their board members are gray-haired and retired and are trying to find a new energy with young leaders. If you look around, you may see an emerging leaders group in the nonprofit sector here as well, Mexico. I don't know, but the Young Nonprofit Professionals Association that started in California now has chapters all over the U.S. and maybe some chapters here. Well, I want to thank all of you for listening and participating and speaking, and I look forward to seeing a little bit more of you the rest of the afternoon, and thank you for letting me come to Chihuahua and learn so much about all of you.